Morning or afternoon, everybody. This is the episode 2 officially of Everyone Hates Recruiters. So it's our vlog at Transition Partners, talking to people on the talent side of things, just getting their opinion and stance on how recruiters are viewed. And today I'm joined by Margaret Buj, who I've dealt with for a number of years at different organizations. So hi, Margaret.
Hi there.
Do you want to just give everybody a quick sort of rundown on your background, who you are, etc.?
Absolutely. So just a very, very quick background. I'm a talent acquisition manager with 15 years of experience, mostly recruiting for global tech companies, but I've also recruited for startups and mid-sized organizations. So as an example, I've recruited for VMware. I worked for Expedia for 4 years. I've recruited for companies such as King, Digital Gaming, or Box, Cloud Content Management. And my last contract was at Avanade, which is a joint venture between Accenture and Microsoft. I've also set up a recruitment function for a startup called Yieldify. So mostly within the tech sector, and I've recruited very internationally across all different functions, and very much across EMEA and also in the US.
Awesome. That's a lot of good experience.
Oh, and I do interview coaching, I forgot. So apart from my recruitment experience for the last 14 years, I've also been coaching people on their interview technique. So I've worked with, I've coached over 1,000 of professionals in private and public sector, truly internationally as well, even though a lot of them are, of course, based in the UK, and I've helped them get the jobs they wanted. And I've also done a lot of hiring manager training and interview training and stuff like that. So.
Good. So on those things, I think we'll sort of start with the talent side and then go back to the interview stuff and the other stuff, because I think as we've discussed previously, those things are even more important in current climate. So just starting with current climate, how are you finding things at the moment? Obviously, everyone's gone through a lot of changes over the last 6 months. How's that affected you sort of personally and professionally and beyond?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly been challenging. So a quarter of UK jobs have been put on furlough. Permanent vacancies fell at the sharpest rates on record in April, but of course a number of sectors backed that trend. My last contract ended at the end of March, and it wasn't due to COVID, but it was just a pretty bad timing because there was really no recruitment going on in April. So I'm lucky I've got my side hustle, but yeah, I'm looking for a full-time recruitment job since then, and it definitely has been challenging. I worked through the recession in 2008 and 2009, and well, I felt it was better then. It's certainly quite challenging, but yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of changes right now. So, strict social distancing rules make it difficult to interview in person. HR departments are operating remotely, so need to coordinate hiring programs without the benefit of being physically together as the team. And from what I understand, most of the businesses have been conducting interviews via Zoom or Microsoft Teams, and onboarding has moved online. So for tech companies, this is actually not that new. I think we're used to working from home, but I think for a lot of other businesses, this certainly has been an adjustment. And yeah, so video interviewing in general, I think that's one of the key trends. It's vastly accelerated time to hire, which is good. But what's going to happen later, who knows? Because hiring trends, I think, will depend on how the country recovers. So I mean, who knows, right? What's going to happen?
Just on that point about hiring trends, do you sort of foresee things? Obviously, things have changed for the last 6 months with regards to everything being remote and sort of with Zoom and such things. Is there anything you sort of think that will stay and you think will always be the way, or what major changes do you think have come out of this?
I wish I had that crystal ball to tell you exactly what's going to happen. It would make my life easier. But, I think in terms of trends, definitely there has been a big reduction in overall staff demand. Whereas the key industries, that's kind of a new term, key industries, they record higher vacancies. So like all of the industries central to the pandemic response, as you know, they've experienced hiring increases. So like, roles in health and social care and food and drinks manufacturing and logistics, they are doing pretty well. And demand in other industries have been adversely impacted by the pandemic. So, I mean, who knows how long it's going to last? I honestly have absolutely no idea. Because like hiring rates in recreation, travel and entertainment are definitely well below what they used to be. I think what's going to stay is the remote working, I think, because some recent data I looked at shows that 60% of workers are confident that they can perform their job efficiently, remotely, even indefinitely. Personally, I mean, I'm great at working from home. Even at Avanade, I've worked from home 2-3 days a week, but I don't want to work from home 100% of the time, personally.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that it's going to be a mixture. But I do hope that the remote working is here to stay, because so many jobs can actually be done from home very, very efficiently. And I'm pretty lucky because I've always worked and lived in central London. Well, not always, but most of the time. But there are people who commute to the office for an hour and a half or 2 hours each day. So just how much more productive they can be and how much happier they can be without having to spend 3 hours on the trains. And I remember having one job outside of London at VMware a few years ago. And, I loved the job, but actually the commute was hard. I was there 3 days a week, but it was an hour and a half one way. And if I was unlucky, it was even an hour and 45 minutes one way. So
that's a really long
I
day.
think, better work-life balance, I hope it's something that will be the result of the pandemic, because we have all slowed down. We had to. So I think it's, it's quite interesting that employers have noticed that most of the work could actually be done efficiently from home. But yeah, I think, another thing that might change is that an increasing number of these really time-consuming tasks are being automated through digital tools. So, when it comes to applications, I think there will be, it's already pretty bad right now. I've seen one recruitment role with 900 applications the other day. But I also think that there will be even more people looking for work once the furlough agreement has ended. So I think finding top talent will require more effort, and highlighting the importance of efficient and effective CV parsing and pre-selection process. And pre-selection criteria might also be narrowed to help with this new challenge. So remote onboarding will develop as well. So I think that's one thing that will happen. Potentially more internal mobility. Like from what I'm hearing, a lot of businesses, they are trying to develop people, develop their stuff internally as well. I think employer branding, well, it always should be one of the strategic focuses, but I think employer branding is going to be even more important, because as important as career sites are, meeting candidates and getting to know them face to face, especially young graduates, is a key steps in the recruiting process. And the recruiting is human job by definition, but obviously COVID has majorly disrupted that whole situation. So, there won't be any job fairs anytime soon. Maybe digital. So I think that's obviously what's going to change, and I'm not sure when that's going to come back. Who knows? And what else? Yeah, I think, prioritizing internal training to prepare teams for future and anticipating skills gap. And I think, training for the management teams as well. Management teams who have to hire and train remote teams. I think that's going to become a focus for many of the organizations, training the management team to manage teams remotely efficiently.
Yeah. Bar the obvious, what do you see as the main challenges between managing teams remotely? Because obviously managing people can be difficult depending on the individual, and also when you add in location and whether it's remote or not. So what would you sort of say as being major challenges, and any tips as a result of what's the best way to go about it?
Yeah, I think, good and frequent communications, because I think some people are naturally quite better at working at home. But I know, I actually had that conversation with some friends yesterday, and I was talking to one, and, we are both like, well, we're very self-disciplined. We can work from home and kind of don't need that supervision. But then one friend was like, no, actually, I need to be kind of told what to do. I need to be supervised. I need to have that accountability. So I think finding that balance of, just being able to set expectations and keep people motivated, and potentially managing remote teams. It depends where they are, right? Because if they're just in the UK, it could be easier within the same time zone. But if you manage teams that are really based remotely across many different locations, I think that's always harder, because you don't have that face-to-face interaction, which I think really helps when you get to know people well. And I think the really challenging part as well, if you start a new job right now. I have a friend who started a pretty senior job in marketing in a financial services institution a few months ago. And it's been really challenging. I mean, she's great at the job, she's doing well, but she hasn't met anyone face to face.
I've just gone through that same thing. So I started a transition partners 7 weeks ago. Physically, I'd only ever met one of the people face to face through, and that was until the day I walked through the door here.
How did you find it? The experience?
It worked well. I think I was quite lucky because I'd spoken to them so much on Zoom, and we'd had a lot of contact. Like, I think we sort of counted, there might have been 12 hours total, like conversations in 3 to 4 weeks, and some interviews, some talking about other things. But it gave me a really good grasp of who people were and what they were about. But
Yeah.
I think if you'd have said this time last year that you would join a company where you hadn't physically met any of the people, you would say that's not possible or feasible. But
No, but we've been forced to do that. So
yeah, we've got so many tools to be able to get by with that, because I think how people come across in Zoom is pretty much how they are face to face, I would always say.
yes, I mean it is. But just to give you with that example of that friend, she's in marketing communications, and she's working for multiple teams, and sometimes there's a Zoom call with 20 people. She doesn't really know who is who.
Yeah, that's true.
Back where she cut. So I think it's different when you work with one team. It's different when you work with 10 different teams.
Yeah, that's very actually my experience, because I found I got a better grasp for who people were when it was a one-to-one in Zoom.
Yeah.
We stick loads of other people. Some people just,
Yeah.
not that they shut down, they just don't want to engage too much when there's loads of other people. And I think I'm probably a little bit guilty of that, because when there were people there that I didn't necessarily know, then I'd be more inclined to keep my mouth shut in case I said anything that I shouldn't, type of thing. But I think one-to-one you can get a good grasp. But I think body language and such things can be a little bit harder to pick up on, I think, over Zoom.
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's, I have another friend. She's gone back to work, but she works for a pretty small organization, and they go to work on and off for 1 week. So 1 week in the office, 1 week at home, which is actually great. I would love to do that. That would be great. Let's see. Yeah.
I think it works well. That balance between the two, I'm probably the same as you, where if I do 2 or 3 days office, 2 or 3 days remote, whatever the way it works.
Yeah.
I think that you have the best of both worlds, and I think that's definitely here to stay, especially with.
I'm really hoping so. I'm really hoping, because it makes just so much, life is just so much easier when you don't have to go to the office every single day and have that commute every single day. And right now, I don't even think we can. I mean, I've been taking the tube if I have to, but it hasn't been busy. In fact, it's been pretty empty most of the time. But if everyone had to go to work, imagine the central line in London. No way. So yeah.
Because my commute at the minute is probably an hour and 10 door to door, and it's really, really easy because I'm on the train, and while the train's quite early, there's literally nobody on the train, so you can just open a laptop, do some work, and it works really, really well. And even going home is exactly the same. But I'm quite intrigued as to whether because I get a seat and it's quite comfortable, and I can sit and do whatever I need to do work-wise, listen to music or read. But I'm very interested to see whenever loads more people are on that train, whether that's exactly the same experience, because I think the way things are with people being a bit wary of COVID and such things, I think whenever we start to get back to more normal, I think certain people will find that quite stressful. And
absolutely, yeah.
That obviously adds, if someone's stressed on your train, then that adds to your stress, surely, as well.
Definitely. Yeah, I'm really curious how it's going to develop. I think, bad time for commercial real estate, right? Because I think companies will not necessarily need the massive office space that they used to have.
Yeah, that's intriguing to see what happens on that front, because I think it's that balance, but there's no doubt that it's going to have an impact. If there's less people in the office, then there's less need to have a huge swing, especially with the prices that comes with that.
Absolutely, yeah.
One of the things I'm also quite intrigued about is, I think, work, as you talked about your friend, who I find it quite easy to work from home, and I don't really get distracted by anything. But I'm quite interested how people will find doing that, because I think during this COVID period, people are extremely glad to have a job and highly motivated to deliver and do well. But once that sort of disappears, I'm wondering whether people's motivation levels might drop from working from home.
And you know what? I actually do think it's kind of hard to keep motivated all the time if you're just at home all the time. And especially like if you have kids. I mean, come on, like you can't really work when you've got small kids at home. So,
yeah, I know that one.
Yeah.
Just talking about, I know we've touched on it obviously with your experience on interview tips. Is there anything, there's obviously a difference between a face-to-face and a Zoom interview. Are there any, what's the major things that you find, or the major advice you've give to people to basically to deal with a remote interview as opposed to a face-to-face? Is there any sort of major difference, or is it still the same principles?
Well, I think the principles of interviewing will be the same. Like you want to prepare, you want to research the company, you want to make sure that you know how your experience matches the requirements of the role. You want to make sure that you have specific tangible examples that demonstrate the impact that you made in your current role or in your previous position, that you research the interviewers, that you prepare some good interview questions. So that, of course, remains the same. But no, of course, there's a little bit of a difference. And, not everyone is used, and you might have noticed that, not everyone is used to having Zoom interviews. And it's actually been quite evident with some of my recent coaching clients. Because I would start speaking to them and, they kind of would look at camera somewhere there, they wouldn't make sure that they look at the camera, or the lighting was really bad. So yeah, I think you need to make sure that your camera is kind of at your eye level. You don't want to keep looking at the camera. Down at your laptop. You want to make sure that you have some, ideally you want to face the light. Because so many people, I try to speak to them on Zoom and they are actually faced like they are, the light is at the back. For us,
I'm just checking if I've done those things correctly.
Yeah, so no, I can see you perfectly well, but ideally you want to be facing the light. Ideally you want a, clean, like non-distracting background. Mine probably isn't ideal over there, but that's a really good lighting. But you don't want the interviewer to see a pile of laundry behind you, right? So, test if you're not used to video interviewing, definitely test the equipment before, whether it's Microsoft Teams or Zoom or Google Hangout. Just test it before and make sure that you are comfortable with using the technology. Just make sure no one disturbs you. Have your phone on silent or turn your phone off. So just the really basics.
Just common sense.
Yeah, just common sense. But again, sometimes if you haven't done that before, you might not.
Totally. People forget these things. Common sense doesn't always prevail.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah.
And with regards to, obviously, your next move will be back into another talent position. Are there things that you want to do differently coming off the back of this that you think you've learned in the last 6 months about maybe how you work or how sort of industry works?
Yeah, it's actually an interesting question. I think there are things that I've always done that I would want to continue doing. For example, making sure that there's a really great candidate experience at each stage of the hiring process. But, I think it's going to be even more important now because so many people, frankly, including myself, I'm stressed as well. Like a lot of people are stressed about the current situation and what's going to happen. And, if their job is safe or if they're not working, when they're going to work next. And honestly, the recruitment experience in most organizations, and you might have seen some of these discussions on LinkedIn, it's been pretty atrocious. Like, having you apply for the job, and firstly, some of these application forms, it's just so cumbersome. Like, make it easy for the candidates to apply. So that's one thing. But the lack of feedback, I think that's pretty bad. And, I completely appreciate that you can't give personalized feedback to anyone who has just applied. But, I've seen companies not giving feedback to people who have been interviewed with them, which I think is pretty bad. So that's one thing. And I think, related to diversity as well. So my last role at Avanade was focused on diversity, but more in terms of hiring more females into the business. Because like most IT companies, especially IT consulting companies, they were looking to attract more female talent into the business, which is great. But with the whole Black Lives Matter movement, I've done a little bit more research into that. And, I've seen a lot of people think, well, even if they kind of feel... Basically, my understanding was that a lot of people, even though maybe they will get hired, but they still don't feel included. So I think that inclusivity bit, how do you engage people once they're already in the organization? That's one thing that I would like to maybe do differently or find out more about or get more involved in. Because typically, as a recruiter, you will hire someone, then you kind of, once the person has signed the contract, you will pass them on to HR. But I think that inclusivity bit, like how do you make sure that people are included once they start in the organization? I think that's very important as well.
Do you think is the most sort of basic thought I have on that? Do you think that's even more difficult in a larger organization, or is there no excuse for it not to be done correctly regardless of the size?
You know what? I think there's no excuse for that to be. Because if it's a large organization, so what? You can have some kind of, virtual onboarding buddy, for example. There's so much. So as an example, the whole Black Lives Matters, which is, that's not something I've ever been involved in. I've not been tasked with hiring more ethnic minorities or anything. But for example, saying that you support Black colleagues is one thing, but actively doing so is another. So how can you follow through on your statements of solidarities? I think you need to be intentional with everything, right? So like maybe asking your Black colleagues what they need. and actively listen and learn about the experiences of your Black colleagues within the organization. So maybe you could participate in a company-sponsored town hall focused on race in the workplace, or if you have employee resource groups for Black employees, you can consider attending that. Or if your company doesn't have an ERG, so you might want to consider joining an online community where personal experiences of race are openly discussed and facilitated by experts. And you also might want to recommend, as an example, your Black colleagues or your female colleagues or whatever, for highly visible projects, or introduce them to influential people at your company and openly acknowledge their accomplishments to others. So that's the kind of stuff. I don't think it matters whether it's a small or large organizations. You can still make that happen if you want to. You have to want to, and you have to be intentional.
It's funny you talk about diversity, because transition partners where I'm working at the moment, it's nearly a totally female dominated office. It's very
really? Okay.
I find it really interesting being sort of, so I think there's about 21 people here, and whenever I first joined there was still people off on furlough, so I was on most days the only male, or on every sort of second or third day. So it was really interesting to see the dynamic and how it's different. And not that you do feel excluded or outside, but there's like conversations that go on in the office whenever I'm the only male, which just totally bypass me. And they're just totally different way of thinking. But it's really opened my eyes up to seeing how not necessarily anything intentional, but how it feels to be that only person in the room sometimes. And it can be something that either sort of pushes you forward, but I've definitely learned a lot in the first 6 or 7 weeks. Even
I think it could be intimidating as well if you're the only person.
Totally. Yeah. But listen, what you say is 100% correct, and it's diversity and everything else that comes with it is hugely, hugely important, even now more than ever. But it's, as I said, definitely opened my eyes up being the only male in the room a lot of the times, even just to see how people think differently and how they work differently. That's the individual, but it also is sometimes down to the person and sort of whether they're white, black, male, female, and that's.
I think a lot of organizations, they know that diversity is important. I think most of us have seen this research. I think it was from McKinsey, how the companies in top quartile for racial and ethnic diversity are more profitable and stuff like that. So I think companies know that diversity is important, but I think for diversity to really work, you have to put diversity and inclusion at the heart of your organization. It has to be part of your core values and manifesto. It's just not enough to talk about it. It has to be embraced at the top, starting with the board. It can't be just an HR initiative. It really has to be included in your company narrative, on your website, in your job description, social media, and all internal and external communications. So Avanade was amazing at that. Actually, that was really included, and really that was at the core of the organization. Another thing that I think it's important is maybe some diversity targets. So I think that some people think, the best person should get the job. Yeah, totally. The best person should always get the job. You shouldn't hire someone because it's a female or the person is black or whatever. I'm not agreeing with that. But at the same time, give people a chance, And that's why I think having some kind of diversity targets actually is very important. And another thing, maybe looking beyond cultural fit, because most employers, and that, they seek to hire employers based on the cultural fit. And of course, you want to hire someone who will fit in with your current workforce. But I think employers should hire more for the cultural add. So targeting companies that bring something unique to your company that doesn't currently exist. So if you do manage a recruitment team, or if you're a recruiter, just cast your recruitment team wider to include people from underrepresented groups. And you might want to also reach out to some professional organizations or conferences or networking events that are catering to that diverse crowd. And there's so much to be done, because I think unconscious bias training for everyone. We all bias, but I think that's important as well, that people understand that even though it's a human nature to be biased, you still want to be able to recognize your own unconscious bias and try to eliminate that through training programs. Yeah. Diversity in job descriptions. So at Avanade, we had this amazing tool called Textio, which will basically, you could just tailor your job description more to either have a neutral tone or have it more tailored to males or female. Of course, we would try to have something that's neutral, So you don't want to use any jargon, and because that can put off young people, for example, from underprivileged background. And there's lots of stuff that could be done. Standardizing job interviews, having just a more structured and scientific recruitment process. and asking candidates the same questions. And a big one is offering remote working opportunities. And I think that's what will change now due to COVID, because even at Avanade, there were so many, it was a bit different because it was consulting, so people had to be based on site. But there were so many situations when we would have a fantastic female candidate, but we couldn't offer the remote working that they were looking for. And I think that's so important. You can really get a much more diverse workforce if you do offer those opportunities.
Yeah. Just funny, just to touch on the point you raised about it's human nature to be biased. I couldn't agree more. But for me, it's always how bias is bias, and whether like you realize you're being biased, but at the same time address it, because it's like obviously where I was born and brought up from in Northern Ireland, it was very much a case of, I always remember I never voted for simple reasons that it wasn't in any way political, but I remember people saying, if you don't vote, it's another vote for them. And I was always like, who's them? They're the same people, the same age as me. I could never get into that mindset of us and them type of thing, because obviously I'm Catholic and brought up Catholic, but for me, there was no difference between Catholics and Protestants. I used to hate that phrase of like, if you don't vote, it's just an extra vote for them, because the them just didn't exist to me. And I can never understand that mindset, which is very, very true these days.
Yeah, definitely.
More than ever. Just go back to just the final couple of things on the talent side. For anybody we're speaking to who's obviously heavily based on talent, which you are, I'm quite intrigued as to sort of what you think the best attributes of a recruiter are and should be.
The best what? Sorry, the best what?
Attributes.
I think there are quite a few. Apart from like the technical skills, you need to be able to know how to source people and use the Boolean searches, and you need to be able how to find people. But apart from that, I think resilience, because we all know the job can get hard at times. Relationship building, I think honesty and integrity are extremely important. Being able to adapt, which we've all seen now during COVID, and just the other stuff that you get for other jobs, right? So listening skills, really good communication skills, time management skills, being professionally persistent, being able to push back as well, because you are you're not just, you need to be able to challenge the hiring manager if it's needed.
It's very, very interesting you say that, actually, because it's sometimes a criticism that's levied towards recruiters that they can be too pushy and maybe push back too much sometimes. So it's quite interesting to hear somebody on that side say, well, that's a valuable thing to do.
Well, I think it depends, because I think when I think of push, it depends, right? Whether it's agency or internal, but I'm more talking about like when you are dealing with the hiring manager and, they have completely unrealistic expectations. You do need to push back at times, especially when you are the expert in a specific area, and with some hiring managers, it's really hard. You really need to present some data. That's why I love using LinkedIn Insight reports, because you will have someone, why can't you find XYZ? I'm like, well, look, this is 5% of the population that have these skills, so where can we be flexible? So having data, I think, is very powerful in recruitment. And actually, that's another thing, because you're asking like what makes a good recruiter. Being able to use data, I think it's becoming essentially, increasingly, actually, I should say, a more data-driven profession. I think we have to be able to use data to persuade and influence. So that's important as well. It's not just the soft skills.
Perfect.
Obviously, it's important.
Final question. For at the end of each of these vlogs, we ask you to nominate somebody that you think would be particularly good to go on this, or worth speaking to, or would have something to say. So is there anybody you'd like to nominate?
I think I'll need to find out a bit more about what is it that you're looking to do, because I have a few people in mind that maybe I'd rather not mention them without talking to them first, but more than happy to take this offline. Yeah, of course, I've worked with some amazing people at Avanade, for example. In fact, in any organization I've worked with some really great people. So depending on what's the topic, I can definitely think of a few names. So
does you mentioned Avanade quite a bit? Is that the role that sort of stands out for you most, that you enjoyed?
Not necessarily. It was just the most recent one, but what was, it was great, but what was interesting, that the whole diversity bit, that was new, that was something new that I have learned in that specific role. Well, I've started learning, obviously there's a lot more to learn, but that was a role I had particularly, my first exposure really, properly to diversity targets and stuff like that. So, not necessarily. I think there are, other roles that were wider in scope. But no, it was great, great organization to work for sure.
Perfect. Listen, Margaret, thank you very much. I thoroughly enjoyed hearing what you had to say on
Yeah,
it.
thank you.
I think we covered quite a few topics over that sort of 20, 30 minutes, but thanks a
Yeah,
lot. That concludes the second Everyone Hates Recruiters vlog. So thanks a lot, Margaret.
thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Take care. Thanks.